those of us that do the work that we do as plaintiffs' lawyers, we have an enormous privilege and an awesome responsibility. We stand for those unable to stand. We walk for those unable to walk. We speak for those who can't speak, the disenfranchised, the powerless, to get them access to justice and hopefully justice itself.
Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and we've got a wonderful conversation ahead of us today with legend Thomas J. Brandi. From the 1976 Yuba City bus disaster, where 28 students were killed and 24 critically injured, to the more recent Oakland Ghost Ship fire, to holding Bank of America accountable for the mistreatment of Social Security recipients with a $1 billion verdict, and all the cases in between, Tom's been there and done that. Along the way, he's won every award available to a trial lawyer of his stature, been nominated to every significant invitation-only trial lawyer organization, and has made it a point to give back, mentoring and training the next generation of trial lawyers. Tom and colleague Bob Arns have helmed the University of San Francisco's trial practice program for the last 2 decades. We also get the opportunity to discuss life challenges and their impacts. One of Tom's sons suffered a spinal cord injury, and another recently suffered a serious brain injury in a bike crash, while Tom was preparing to try a serious brain injury bike crash. Some of it is hard stuff, and yet not so dark as one might imagine. So please sit back and enjoy this broad and deep conversation with Tom. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you. I want to go back to, I would say, kind of the beginning and get a little bit of a sense of who you are and how you ended up on the path to the law. My understanding is you grew up in San Francisco.
Grew up in San Francisco. My father, Attilio Antonio Brandi, is from an immigrant family that came from a tiny village in Italy. My mother's family is from Slovenia. Both were children raised here from immigrant families. English wasn't spoken in my Italian grandmother didn't speak English. My Slovenian grandparents did, but they usually shifted in mid-sentence into Slovenian, which is a language that is as easily to read and pronounce as the eye chart without the vowels. Grew up in the Sunset District, 38th Avenue. Went to Holy Name to grammar school. The Sisters of Show Me No Mercy. St. Ignatius to high school. And then I went to college at San Jose State. And then USF for law school.
And for college, I understand that you had a baseball scholarship?
I did. Baseball was all I dreamed about as a kid. Sports were clearly primary to academics, and that was my dream to play ball. When I was a junior in college, I had a good year. I hit 300, and I'll never forget talking with the Cardinal Scout at the time, and this was an introduction to so much more than baseball. We were talking about signing, and he said, "You're going to college. You're going to get a degree." He said, "You want a bonus?" He said, "I can get, for the amount of money that you want, I can get 2 black kids or 4 Dominicans." And boom, racism.
Yeah.
And the effect, the economic impact of it. And, all I wanted to do was play baseball.
Yeah.
It was really a mind-expanding conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's early in one's career to be faced with that.
To see that, yeah. For law school, when I was in my last year of college, the athletic director offered me a position as a graduate assistant because I was thinking of maybe getting a master's degree or teaching. I ended up majoring in history. But I wanted to try law school because, to me, law was the only place where little could hold big accountable. It was the only potential for social justice, that you at least had the avenue potentially to do it. And so actually we were playing a doubleheader against USF. And the basketball coach at USF, Phil Vukisevich, had coached me in that sort of 12 to 14 year period. And he asked what was I doing, and I told him I'd applied to USF, and he said, anywhere else? I said, Hastings. And he came back in between games, and he asked the coach if he could speak to me. And he said, I just talked to the dean at USF. You're in, you're getting your letter, it's going out. And I talked to a friend of mine at Hastings, and you got in there. Congratulations. So that's how I found out I got into law school.
Wow. Before we move past San Jose State, I understand you were the starting shortstop. Is that your?
I played shortstop at San Jose, yeah.
Outside of a career in baseball, had law appealed to you in certain ways as you were growing up? Or at what point did it become clear to you that that was an interest?
The academic background of my parents' families, my respective families, my mother's the only one that graduated from high school. My dad didn't. None of my uncles did. My two aunts didn't. And, you know, they went through a time of depression, et cetera, in the war. And lots of times you had to work at 14. My father's father died when he was young. No, my only exposure to law was basically the TV shows or the incredible Atticus Finch. I'm part of that generation that thought, wow, that's something. I also saw with the anti-war movement and with civil rights that it was time to not just question authority, but try to take on the position and role of authority and do something for positive social impact and positive change. And that law was the best way to do it. Within that, what appealed to me most was to be a trial lawyer. And I just feel so blessed to be able to do it.
And to help us kind of get our mindset into where we are chronologically, you started law school approximately late 60s, early 70s?
Yeah, 69, 70. And my wife and I met as undergraduates. I went to school, day school, first year, and a night school the last two. I was married. I worked full time in law school.
What did you do?
Before law school, I drove a truck. And during college, I worked partially in a warehouse. I was a playground director for the city and county on Sundays. My last 2 years of law school, I was teaching at Aptus Junior High School and going to school at night. We had 2 kids in 3 years, first 3 years of our marriage. Basically, I left the house at 7 o'clock in the morning and got home at 6 o'clock and ate and left at 6:25 and went to law school and got there at 5 minutes to 7. Our classes were from 7 to 10 and got home about 10 after 10 and talked to my wife for a little bit and then studied and did that for a couple of years and found myself passing the bar.
When making the choice, if you got into both what is now UC Law, Hastings, and USF, was there anything that drove the decision-making? Was it the parochial school background? Was it...
I'm smiling because it's a funny story. A friend of mine who was a year ahead of me in high school had gone to Hastings. And in those days, Hastings gave one final in June for your whole semester. USF was on the semester basis. And he said to me, and he was really bright and really talented. And he says, I hate law school. He says, I just can't stand it. He says, don't blow a whole year if you don't like it. You go to USF because it's only one semester. If you change your mind, you can go. That actually was part of it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I didn't know if academically, if that was something that I would do well or if I could adjust to. And when I got into law school, my first year in the day, it's just like, I wasn't the kid that got it right away. It took me a while to pick it up. Did not do well academically my first year and did really well beginning in my second year. Took me a while to figure out the system, the whole Iraq and all the rest of this stuff. And I felt law school took away your creativity. And the beauty of what we get to do is our creativity, is restricted somewhat by Code of Civil Procedure. But when you're cross-examining somebody, I mean, you can do things that are, I've seen lawyers do things that are just beautiful.
Mm. Outside of the work that you did to support the family, did you have any internship, clerkship, any of the things that modern era students do to try and find a position at a firm?
Yeah, we were given an opportunity. We were assigned either public defender or a DA, and I was assigned to the public defender, and I did preliminary hearings and some other things. I had an experience there that made me realize that I wasn't set up for a criminal career. I saw that, like so many law students, you look at criminal defense lawyers, and they somehow, despite the power of the state, protect the right of this innocent person who's been wrongfully accused. And one of the jobs they gave me, the public defender, was to go upstairs to the 7th floor of the Hall of Justice and interview the guys that were charged with whatever they were charged with, to do a memo and get their version of it. And there was a guy who was charged with assaulting his grandmother, breaking into her house and assaulting her and stealing some money. And when I went upstairs, he claimed that he was visiting her and she had slipped and fell, and this whole thing was bogus. And quite frankly, he scared the crap out of me. And I came home that night, and I just sort of brushed by my wife. We had a little baby. And I went in and took a shower because I just thought, man, I just feel unclean. I couldn't possibly, in my mind, I understood in the rational part that your clients, you have to make sure your client has all the rights of the Constitution. You have to prevent the state from taking away rights. You have to be the bulwark to see the rights of everyone are protected. But in that moment, I just couldn't see myself standing up for that person. And I thought, good thing I learned it now.
Very much so. So where did you, or how did you find your first
job?
Yeah.
I applied. I sent out letters. I got nothing. You send out a letter and you're just in the middle of the pack. I hadn't been a clerk anywhere in terms of a firm. I mean, so many people that are really successful lawyers, they were a clerk at like Arns was a clerk at Hoberg, which was a big firm, or Walk Up, or like you have a kid that was working as a clerk for you that was in my class last year that I really, really liked that kid. He got a big future. And I didn't have any of that. So I applied with the city attorney. I was with a friend of mine from high school, and his brother called, and he says, "Oh, Tom's here. He's looking for a job." And he says, "Oh, he was working for the state. He ought to come down." And I went down and I had this interview, and it was originally a private office that did the work for the state by contract, and they did eminent domain. And then when the tort immunity laws changed, they got the work to do it for the state, and then they gradually became state employees. And so I got a job there. Paul Ahdern, who was a member of Aboda and partner at Sedgwick later.
I remember Paul.
Paul and I began our careers there the same day. Paul ended his career trying a case with me. He passed away last November.
Yeah.
And Don Sullivan, who's a judge, Don was working there, and they had guys that had tried 200 and 300 cases. And it was wonderful. I started in June. I was sent to shadow a lawyer, Matt Raggio, in a case in Redwood City. Another guy named Pee Wee Williamson in July, and he had a second trial, and he says, "You want to take some witnesses?" I said, "Yeah." And one day Pee Wee was late, and I took 2 witnesses before he even got there. And I tried 2 cases before he took my first deposition, which was, so within the first 4 months I was there. And it was like that. And Don Sullivan and Paul and I, the older lawyers, we loved them because they'd say, "You want to try a case? Here, you try it with me." And then they'd give you as much as you wanted to do. And I say sometimes I learned my large part of my craft and made my mistakes on the state's nickel.
That's a good place to make them.
it was a valuable experience because they were big cases. It's how I got my next job. I tried a case against Picardo, which was the Yuba City bus crash.
I was hoping we were going to go into that a little bit so that people know what we're talking about. Can you give us a little bit of a background on that incident?
They were a field trip, just under 60 kids coming from Yuba City, the Bay Area, and they took an off-ramp at the Benicio Martinez Bridge, and the driver, Evan Prothero Jr., I will never forget him and his deposition. He hit the curve, and he didn't make it. There was a question as to speed. There was a question as to defect in the vehicle and design of the road. And most of the families settled, and one family insisted on going to trial. And I was assigned to work on the case with a senior lawyer, and I ended up doing the jury selection and the final argument and doing the examination. And I don't know if Jim Picardo is known by too many of these, but at one time he was one of the great lawyers in America. He had the record for the highest verdicts in the most counties of California. And they had a jet plane that would fly him here and there and what have you. And here I am sitting in a courtroom with him and watching him picking a jury. And it was like a clinic. It's a clinic, just the way he did it. And one of the things that I really noticed he did is he'd ask a question, but his eyes went beyond the person he asked the question for to see the body language and the reaction of people sort of in the cone of vision. And, he probably, I don't know how many cases he had tried. It was extraordinary. But it just, the way he did things, the way he presented, the way he drew out in his direct of the parents of what their deceased daughter meant to him, meant to them. And the power of the moment of the reality of the love of a parent and a child. It was just so honest, so raw, so authentic. And really one of the lessons there that transferred to me in my career is when I'm talking to a parent of a child or a spouse who's lost their loved one, you have to be able to reach inside them to get that feeling out of them so the jury can truly understand their love, truly understand and measure their loss by the mirror image of their love. And it's something that to do that, you have to really spend time with your client. I know I'm way ahead of this in chronology, but that's why you go to your client's house. That's why you see how they lived. I had a case a few years ago. I represented two young men who were firefighters, and they were being helicoptered to a fire, and a helicopter crashed, and they were killed. 7 of them were killed, and I represented 2 of them. And one was Native American, and their families, they were in Oregon, but the accident was Northern California. So I went and I spent a day with each family. And the family of one of the boys was very deeply religious evangelical. And the first thing they wanted to do was to have a prayer. And so they had a very traditional Christian prayer. And they asked me a lot of questions about faith, etc. And I spent the day with them. And that evening I spent with the family of the Native American boy. And they took me, and they had a teepee set up, and they did a smoke service, a healing service for 45 minutes and chanting and stuff, because this kid was studying to be a shaman within his tribe. And I was thinking about the belief systems of these two people and how much belief meant to them and spirituality meant to them, and how I could bring that out in the nature of their loss. It was a very moving experience for me.
Can I ask you about your spirituality? The family asked you about faith. You were raised in, it sounds like, in the Catholic
I am,
faith.
And I'm probably one of the few people that you meet that still goes to Mass on Sunday.
We had Kevin Morrison in last week, who who also is still of the faith.
Yeah.
And I ask in part because a lot of the work that we do, what you're talking about is very challenging work. Do you find that having faith is helpful for you in terms of being able to deal with some of the difficult work that we do?
I think my father-in-law used to say, stay close to the faith and far from the institution. It's the people that screw things up. I know my mother worked in our parish holy name, and the priest that was there was one of the priests that was accused of being a pedophile. And we had some really heavy conversations about that issue. I think the concept of faith to me really relates to your value system and your moral compass and the things that your parents gave you and the things you took from that and how you've evolved into who you are as a person and what your belief system is. And so that's part of the reliance, the core of the reliance, whether you have a religious aspect of that or not. The values, the core value, dare I say, be good to people, love one another, be honest, traditional values. They're the same in any faith. They're generally found in any moral compass that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So I guess in that sense, that's clearly a part of all of us. It's a heavy question, Miles.
Well, that's what we're here for. We're here to probe and figure out what makes great lawyers tick. In that regard, I know you started your work with the state and doing what would, in essence, amount to defense work for Caltrans. Is that fair?
We defended the state in tort cases, and I also got to try some eminent domain cases where you're acquiring property. I'm 20-something years old, and they sent me to Bakersfield. And I was trying a case on Richard Burright owned this piece of property, and the state wanted to take a sliver of it, and his position was that this was probably going to be the next great major development in Bakersfield, but for what the state did. And so there were experts and engineers, but the lawyer was 77 years old. His name was Calvin Conron, and he'd gone to Stanford in the 1920s. And everybody, we're in court, and everybody would say, "Oh, you're with Mr. Conron's case, okay?" So we put the case on, what happened. During final argument, I stand up to give final argument. He gets up, and he walks in the back in the last row. Then he goes over in the corner, and he takes out, I don't know what he had, some not a blanket, but something soft, put it against the wall, and put his head down like he's going to sleep. So I give my argument, and then he stands up, and he says, "I'm from Bakersfield. Been living here my whole life. Richard's from Bakersfield. You're from Bakersfield. That boy is from San Francisco. And that boy is leaving right after this trial to go back to that big fancy office in San Francisco, in that big city. We're going to still be here in Bakersfield." So I had a rebuttal. Now I'm giving away 50-something years of experience to this guy. And I said, "Mr. Conron is right. I am going back to San Francisco. In fact, tonight I'm going to see my wife and my 2 children, who are 5 and 3 years of age. And I really missed them being here, like you would miss your children, something like that." And it worked. But it was, I don't know, maybe I was too stupid to be unnerved, but it was a classic move.
And as we talk about this shows my ignorance on the eminent domain side. That's tried to a jury.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. They set the value.
Okay.
And that was what the case was about. And they were short trial. I mean, they were like 2 or 3 days.
Okay.
It's great.
As we're talking about trying cases in Bakersfield, trying the Yuba City bus incident, where are we as far as the Discovery Act is concerned?
Oh, it's regular, same. I mean, the older lawyers didn't know about discovery. I mean, they tried everything. After I was with the state, I went to work for Al Abramson, and I had a case against him, and I had a case against Picardo, and both of them offered me jobs. And I went to work with Abramson. In the 1970s, there were only a handful of $1 million verdicts that had even occurred in the country. And Al got a $10 million verdict. He was an extraordinary trial lawyer, and I learned a great deal from him. In fact, after I left, we still retained a really close relation. He's the one that nominated me one of the people for a BOTA. I see every BOTA plaque above you, and American College and the International Academy and all that stuff. And I learned a ton from him. He was a marvelous trial lawyer. Marvelous.
Was it Abramson Bianco when you went?
It was Abramson and Bianco. And while I was there, I had done just the state cases. And with Al, I started aviation. I tried a 8-9 week plane crash case down in Salinas. I did products. I didn't do any public entity work at all. And I was introduced to the first great case of my life, the Dalkon Shield.
Why don't we go into that if that's okay?
The Dalkon Shield was an intrauterine device that was manufactured by a company called A.H. Robbins. They basically was on the market from 70 to 74. And you have a camera, so I'm holding my thumb and my index finger. It's about that big, the intrauterine device, and it had a string that came out. And some of the other devices, the Copper 7 had a string that was like fish line, a monofilament. The Dalkon Shield had a multi-filament string wrapped around each other like spaghetti, like a tea bag.
Okay.
And so if you put a tea bag in a cup of tea, sometimes the tea will wick up the string. Well, the same thing happened. The vagina is full of germs. The uterus is germ-free. Bacteria would go up the string into the uterus, and then infections could occur.
Oh, wow.
So I learned all that science. And they marketed the product. In the middle 60s, the birth control pill began. So women for the first time had the right to control their body with respect to contraception. And there were side effects, bloating, depression, anxiety. And also some forgot to take their pills. And they were looking for an alternative. Intrauterine devices at the time were basically for women who had had children. And so the uterus had expanded, you could get it in. This was one of the first ones that you could do for someone that had never had children, is where they marketed it. They marketed it to colleges. They marketed it to clinics in poor areas. The rationale, according to internal company documents, was because, well, these women aren't going to remember to take their pill. My God, they need, we've got to have something to prevent them from having children. It was so awful.
Yeah.
And during the course of the early years, they had, if I remember my evidence correctly, 20 women died and by infections. And a number of letters were written by doctors saying, "Dear so-and-so, we're having this issue. My client got a abscess, had to have a hysterectomy." And the letter back always was, "Dear doctor, thank you very much for your letter. This is the first we've heard of anything like this." And then they would ask the doctor for the records. And then sometimes they would ask the doctor to be on a panel that they would have locally so that he would not necessarily be negative to the product.
Interesting.
This is something that, it was the Dalkon Shield that led me to get into all the other pharmaceutical product cases that I did.
Yeah.
And so you saw this. So 20-something women died. Tens of thousands of them were rendered sterile. The defense was always the same. She's a whore.
Wow.
Sexual transmission of venereal disease. That's what the problem is here. So we were talking science. They were talking character. There was a large firm in San Francisco that no longer exists, a very good law firm. And they represented A.H. Robbins. The litigation was stopped in 1985 by Robbins filing a bankruptcy. But they would hire young women, roughly between the ages of 25 and 35, which were the ages of our clients. They would take their depositions and they would just assault their character. And the depositions were bloodbaths. I mean, it was harassing. It was intimidating. And I would go home and I'd say to my wife, I can't believe here's this bright woman lawyer just beating the hell out of my client, and you could, it was really an interesting thing to watch. Robbins filed the number of cases that were tried, and Robbins filed bankruptcy, and the bankruptcy lasted forever. Father and son sold the company, got $800 million before the woman got a dime.
Wow.
And during that process, they had filed for a class action, and the plaintiffs had an opposition, and I was the one by default that argued in the Ninth Circuit. And we prevailed. I say default because there were lawyers from all over the country, and it was like, they said, well, we'll let Brandi do it. So we argued and we won. And then 1985, we had the same argument, same thing again. This judge in Richmond, Robert Marriage, was the judge who oversaw the cases. And Judge Marriage was quite a renowned judge. He'd integrated the schools. He'd had death threats, etc. And I'll never forget the first hearing. Cases were assigned to him, and he said, well, I know Mr. Robbins. He's a good fellow. We have dinner quite often, so I ought to be able to help resolve these cases. And I thought, am I the only one here that doesn't see a conflict?
That seems like he should be recusing,
And
not
exactly.
resolving.
So we had hearings on Saturday. So we'd fly in on Friday night, and then the hearing was at 8 a.m., which is 5 o'clock for your body. And so he wanted to impose a class system. And I got up, and I've never forgotten this. I said, Your Honor, it's with a sense of deja vu that I rise. I'd never met him. I said, one of the named plaintiffs, who I'm set for trial in 1 month in San Francisco, was the named plaintiff in the Ninth Circuit that ruled that class action was not appropriate. So I believe these are barred by res judicata for the named people and collateral estoppel for everyone else. And the courtroom just kind of froze. And he says, well, we'll take a recess. And he took a recess, and he came back and he says, we're going to continue this matter. And he says, I'd like to see Mr. Brandi in chambers. And I went into chambers, and he had Griffin Bell, who was Robbins' counsel, former judge, former Attorney General of the United States under Jimmy Carter, Charles Allen Wright, who was a Robbins lawyer for them. Maybe people don't remember Wright and Miller of federal practice. Okay, Harvard professor. And these three guys are 60s, early 30s. And they sat me in a straight back chair, like you're sitting, and they were sitting in a sofa, three of them. And they were basically telling me why I needed to do this, right? Why I needed to get in line. Because they had a group of plaintiffs' lawyers that they had cut a sweetheart deal with who were going to be taken care of, but their clients were going to be taken care of. And, it's always about the client, first and foremost and only. And after basically they were lecturing me like a little boy for 30 minutes, I said, I just want to thank you for taking the time to speak so frankly. I'm going to give this all the thought it deserves as I fly home to San Francisco. Thank you very much. I thought I could speak Southern too. So you wanted to say something else, but you couldn't.
Yeah.
It dragged on, and finally the bankruptcy was lifted, and we ended up trying the last two Dalkon Shield cases in America in 1997.
Wow.
And I've never forgotten it. It was in the temporary courthouse on Folsom Street. Alex Saldamano was our judge. I had two women. One was offered $3,000. One was offered $30,000. They were both infertile. And the jury awards after 6 weeks were $700,000 and $1 million. They just never got what it meant for a woman not to be able to have a child. And that's what I talked to the jury about.
Because I'm familiar with the phrase Dalkon Shield, and I have a vague memory of those. I was, a clerk at Veen's back in those days, 97. I had no idea that the incidents dated back to the 70s.
70 to 74 was when it was officially on the market, and they they basically were forced to take them off the market, and like companies with no conscience, they dumped them in the third world. They dumped them in Africa and South America.
Any of those incidents find their way to the United States for justice?
No, there was jurisdictional issues, and you're living in Uganda and you can't have kids. The last thing anybody's ever going to tell you is you could sue a company in Virginia.
Yeah. And I'm going back a little bit to your career arc in terms of Abramson, Bianco. Then after that, it was Bianco, Brandi, Jones, right?
Bob Bianco, who taught at USF for many years, and Barbara Jones, who retired last year as presiding judge of the Court of Appeal. And I started a firm, and we were together for 10 years till Barbara went on the bench. And then Bob and I split, and I started my firm in 1992.
And so the Dalkon Shield cases were with you
throughout. My first big verdict was in 1986. It was a med-mal case. It was a no-offer case, and we got $4.1 million in Santa Clara. Judge Homer Thompson. It's incredible.
What was that case about?
It was about a problem with a birth and a woman doctor. They delayed the birth, and we felt they should have had a C-section. And they had very, very good and veteran defense lawyers. And I was a kid and I tried a couple of med-mals at the time, and they just didn't think we had a shot. And we did. It's one of the first times where I really got to talk to the jury about what the truth of a case is and what really happened and how you're judges of the truth of the case. You're the judges of the fact. Nobody else is. And you understand the human condition. And you have an opportunity to weigh the evidence. And you saw it, but more importantly, what did it tell you? And we had 10 women on the jury. They felt that the women would relate to the woman doctor. I thought they would see what it meant to be a mother first. And we prevailed.
I remember him being an instructor for me at the University of San Francisco in the trial practice group. And I believe he did that for quite some time.
He did.
And then did you and Bob Arns directly take over after him?
No, Jim Goodman was for a while, and I think they might have had somebody else.
Okay. But you and Bob have been the trial practice instructors at USF, professors at USF for
20 years.
20 years.
And this year, we start our 21st year. It's wonderful. It's great.
How did you find yourself doing that?
Bob asked me. Jeff Brand was the dean, and he says, we need somebody on this. And Bob said, oh yeah, Tom and I will do that. And the first year we used the Nita materials, and we didn't like it. And then we took a case that Bob had, and we transcripts. And so we teach the first 3 weeks evidence. Bob's devised the evidence wheel, the trial wheel, which I would encourage everyone listening to.
It's a great resource
to get. And we have a way of teaching evidence in the first 3 weeks. Real Friends have evidence lectures at 3:52 p.m. frequently, with each thing standing for something, relevance, foundation, hearsay, exceptions, procedural motions, etc. And then we start in with direct exam and cross of a lay, of an expert, opening, closing, laying foundation, using PowerPoints, how to stand, the physicality of cross. Actually, I bet we're the only trial practice class that in the first night teaches the power of 170.6 and how to challenge a judge. We actually have an exercise where we give them facts, and you're a plaintiff or you're a defendant, and we give them scenarios and show them how to challenge. So and then their final exam is a trial with a Superior Court judge and a jury.
That sounds like a wonderful experience.
It's great. It makes me a better lawyer.
How so?
Oh, you see things and you think of different ways of doing things. It's fun. I really enjoy the trial process. And at this juncture in my life, I love the opportunity and the ability to help some young person, with gaining an understanding of themselves and of their skills and how to apply their talents and to the facts and their interpretation. Because, Miles, you could do something one way and I could do something another, completely different, but both be very successful, which is the beauty of what we get to do. And so it's giving an opportunity to these kids to flower. It's totally unrelated to your class standing. I always tell the kids, don't let yourself be defined by your class standing.
I have found that the best lawyers that I've come across in the trial world are oftentimes not the Harvards or Stanfords or the number one in their class. They're the folks with a chip on their shoulder. I think of you. I think of Cynthia. I think of Bill. These are people who have something to prove.
I tried a case against Merck, the Vioxx case, and it was 8 weeks of trial. And the jury went out and they sent a note that unmistakably signaled defense verdict. And there were two plaintiffs. I had one plaintiff and Brian Panish had the other plaintiff. And we had lunch. We said, damn, I can't believe this. And so we went back and I said, I guess it's going to be after lunch. And any lawyer listening to this knows how no clock moves as slowly as the clock when his jury is out. It was 2:30. It was 3:00. I thought, they got to come in. 3:30. The defendants, Merck, their lawyers had called in their press team. One had called in his parents because they were going to have a press conference to celebrate their victory. So they're all standing there in the back of the courtroom. It's 3:30. It's 3:45. It's 4:00. It's 10 after 4. I said to the bailiff, I said, what's going on? He goes, oh, they went home. So they went home? Yeah. And these guys came in and they're standing there, and Brian Panish, he points to me and he says, San Jose State. And he points to himself and says, Fresno State. And then he goes to them. He goes, Harvard, Georgetown, Georgetown, Harvard, Harvard, Georgetown. We're still effing standing.
It must have been a fun moment.
It was very interesting.
Tune in next week for part 2 with Tom Brandi. And thank you for listening today. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.